ready. Hey, Creekside, we're back with another episode of Backyard Science. Thanks for all of the pictures that you have shared with us, your snails and your pill bugs. We have another creepy crawly backyard critter we're going to have a look at today. And we're going to open it with a question today. Would you touch a worm? I did ask this question of my first grade students and some of their parents last week, and they sent me some results. 2 students said, yes, Miss Smith, if I had a glove, I'm pretty sure I would touch a worm. And look how many people, 7 students and 3 parents said, I would totally touch a worm bare-handed. And 2 parents said, nope, Miss Smith, I am not touching a worm. I did make a little key. The blue squares are my kids, and the pink squares are the adults that participated in the survey. So thanks for that. So would you touch a worm? Something for you to be thinking about. I do have another poem to share with you before we get started. Now I'll track the poem for us today. My handy dandy clips can move that. Let's make sure that doesn't blow away. Okay. And of course the title is Worms. This poem is slimy and twisty and squirmy. It tells the tall tale of a pleasant earthworm who lived underground, munching old leaves, then turning them into soil for the trees. And if you notice my little illustration here, we've got a nice little earthworm coming up out of the ground, and the flower is saying thank you to the worm. And I'm sure the worm is thinking, you're welcome. We'll talk about why worms are so important throughout the lesson and definitely at the end of the lesson. So my vocabulary words did not fit on the same page with my poem this time. So let me flip this so the wind doesn't get us. So let's talk about some worms. Some words. The word for the snails was gastropod, and the pill bugs were isopods. Well, the worm is not any kind of a pod, doesn't have any kind of a foot or feet at all. But it does belong to a family of animals called annelids, and that means little rings. And you're going to see little rings or little segments up and down the worm's body because it is an annelid. A worm has an anterior, which is its head end. A worm has a posterior, which is its tail end. And a worm has segments like the pill bug did, or those little rings. We're also going to have an up close look at our worms, and we're going to see a really fat part, a fat band near the head, near the anterior end, and that is called the clitellum. We'll talk about what that part is for in a little bit. They have a prostomium, which is a mouth flap. We'll talk about its job. They burrow into the ground and make little tunnels everywhere. And they have setae, which are like little bristly hairs. And unless you find a really big worm, you're probably not going to feel those or see those. And normally at the end of our lesson is when we make our diagram. But I'm going to head and make our diagram today, and then we'll have a look at our worm. So if my cameraman wants to get an up-close look at our quick diagram. Worms are really easy to draw. Nice and wormy. I'm going to start drawing those lines. Those lines up and down the worm's body are his rings or his segments. And he's kind of like one muscle up and down, and they squeeze and release and squeeze and release, and that's how he moves through the dirt. They don't have ears and they don't have eyes. But right at the front of their anterior, their head end, I'm going to write the word anterior, is their prostomium. That prostomium is a little flap that covers the worm's mouth, and that keeps things out of his mouth that he does not want to go in his mouth. And that fat band that we probably will be able to spot on our worm is usually closer to the anterior end. It's closer to the head end, and it is called the clitellum. And that's where they form their egg sac. And they also have the tail end. That's their posterior. I hope you write prettier than I'm writing today. There we go. And let's see. Oh, setae. Setae are like teeny tiny hairy bristles that help to pull them through the dirt. And I've looked at quite a few worms before, and I never saw one big enough to feel or even to see those little setae. But those are on the bottom of the worm, and they do help the worm to move through the dirt and make their burrows. So there we go. We'll talk about that fat band in just a minute when we spot it. Worms are found in the same places that I found snails and pill bugs. Good, dirty, gooey, wet, shady places. And I went ahead and dug some out. Oh my, there they are. So would Miss Smith touch a worm? Yes, she would. We want to be able to see our worms very well today. So I've got some bath water. We're just going to pick up one of our wiggly worms, and we're going to dip it in the water and give it a little bath so that we can see him better. All right. Oh my goodness, this busy worm, you can see him squeezing his muscles. You see how he gets fat and skinny? And fat and skinny, that's how he moves through the dirt. And as I told you, I can't spot his setae, and I can't feel them on my hand. But his clitellum, I'm not sure if you can see it. It's a very slightly different color right in there. Worms lay eggs, and they leave their eggs in an egg sac. So when this worm gets mature enough, it will form an egg sac, and then it will crawl away from the egg sac and leave it behind in the dirt. And they don't go back and care for their young. They just leave that egg sac, and when little worms are born, they look just like a big worm, only they're teeny tiny. And they know exactly what to do as soon as they're born. So I'm going to put this little fella back down in the dirt because I think he would be much happier. So I've got a couple of activities you might want to try at home. This one would be a really great thing to do, especially if you had a like one of those 2 or 3 liter drink bottles. You'll notice I've got something down in the middle of this because I wanted my worms that I have put down in this dirt to be able to be close to the edges. And there's so much condensation from the moisture in here that I'm having a hard time seeing it. But if you were to watch it for a few days and you kept your dirt nice and moist in there, you might actually be able to see some burrows down in the dirt that your worms might make. And another fun activity, you can make a shape poem. I just drew a nice little wormy shape. And shape poems don't rhyme. They're adjectives that describe something. And in this case, of course, they described a worm. And I said the worm was wiggly and fat and wet and slimy. So you could make a shape poem. So if you do handle some worms, please be careful with them. They're great for the environment, and they're great for you. And this is why. Because worms are so good for the soil, they help the plants grow. And if plants like these flowers, especially these early spring flowers, are well provided for, then the bees can get the nectar and stay healthy. And if the bees are alive and healthy, then they can go and pollinate. That's another word we might want to do for a bee lesson one day. But pollination is really important for all plants. And they pollinate the plants like fruits and vegetables and things that we eat. So worms make food for us and food for other animals. So take good care of the worms. And if you get outside and find some worms, please share some great worm pictures with us. Have a great time.